So this week we're talking about chapter 4, which is organizational behavior and management thinking. Does anybody know, or can somebody talk to me about what they think organizational behavior is? Who's read chapter 4 already? Nobody. It might be a good idea to kind of review the chapter before you come to class. If you don't read it, at least browse through it so you have an idea about what we're talking about, so everybody doesn't look lost. So nobody can talk to me about organizational behavior? Not one person? Silence. Organizational behavior has to do with how people behave or act within an organization. So we're going to be talking today about how people behave and act in a work environment, in a healthcare organization. Organizational behavior falls under the field of psychology, sociology, communications, anthropology. It falls under many of these disciplines. So, we know that, or we may not know, but we will know soon, that organizational behavior can happen at 3 different levels. And we're going to go through each of these levels. So the first level is the individual level. That's us, ourselves. So within ourselves, we have perceptions, attitudes, and assumptions, right? And the next level is in the group, which would mean between individuals. So groups, under groups, you might have leadership, teamwork, and decision making. And then you have a collective level, which is more within the entire organization. And under that structure, it would be work structures, organizational systems, organizational culture, and organizational learning and adaptation. So if we take this and we put it into an example, we might say that individual is Mr. Bradley here, right? And a group might be this row right here. And collective would be what?
Everyone.
The entire class,
Everyone.
right? Everybody. So you might say, oh, kind of what does that have to do with healthcare? Well, there's some challenges in healthcare for organizational behavior. And here are some of them. Within the industry, there's rising cost, obviously declining reimbursement, increased competition. We see it right here in Hope County. You have First Health and Cape Fear right down the street from each other, both building new facilities, right? So increased competition, consumer demands, new services, outpatient care, chronic illnesses, patient safety concerns, and quality of care, and obviously labor shortages, right? Then within the organization, some challenges we have are professional workforce, exacting work, high reliability. How much can we rely on the people that work for us? Technical expertise and professional autonomy. So when we think about organizational behavior, you might say that a lot of it has to do with our minds and how we think and what we think. And all that has to do with cognition. So mental processes can include what you notice, what you process, and what you put it into meaning. So if we stop right here and we think about, let's think about the first day of class, which was not too long ago. When you walked in, tell me some of the things you noticed. Anything.
This board.
You noticed the smart board, okay. Somebody else.
Not a lot of people.
Not a lot of people, okay.
People you had never met?
Unfamiliar faces, okay.
Mostly female.
Sorry?
Mostly female.
Mostly female, okay. What other observations?
A yellow wall.
A wall.
Yellow
Yellow wall, okay. All right, so did anybody notice anything about me? No, all right.
Didn't want to
Oh,
put
get
that
out
out
of
here.
What did you notice? Nobody.
We don't want to put that out there.
You don't want to put that out there. All right, we're gonna come back to that. We're gonna come back to that. Okay, so after you notice those things, how did you process that? So let's go back to here. What was your example?
Oh, I mean, okay, well, I could say one thing that's safe to say, that you seem like a pretty good instructor that knew your,
Before I even say anything though.
and you don't have to say anything, sometimes we can read.
Okay,
We can read.
all right, so stop right there.
Body language.
So you noticed, so you're saying that sometimes the initial information that you noticed will spring you into processing information.
Right.
And the process part would be, she seems, whatever it is you said.
I can't put the words together, but.
Well put together.
Yeah.
So that's one example. Let's talk about the yellow wall. Who said that? All right, so you saw a yellow wall, and then what was the next step? What did you process? Did you say, that's a bright wall, it's gonna distract me in class? Or did you say, that's a really bright wall, it's pretty, it's nice to see? So you understand that once you saw it, that was the notice part. Then the next step was the information processing, right? Now somebody said that there was a lot of females. That was was it you? That said that you noticed there were a lot of women in the class. So that's what you noticed. Then what did you process from that? There had to be another thought that came after that.
That's maybe it's female cause.
No? Did you think that it would make the class more comfortable because you yourself are a woman? No? Yes? Okay. And then I'll tell you one more. So you said that you saw a lot of unfamiliar faces. So that's what you noticed. So what did you process from that?
Well, some may have that they are worked in other areas before.
So you're saying that because there were unfamiliar faces that you figured you would have to work with them, right? At some point.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the next step, the meaning would be, I'm going to meet some new people, right? I'm going to make some new friends. So these are the steps of mental processes that you go through in cognition. Mental processes are used to handle information. They have to do with perceptions and thinking. You guys talked about perceptions a little bit. Without me even saying anything, you guys have already formed a perception in your mind, right? And when you do this, you don't always think about the fact that you're doing it. It just kind of happens, right? It's kind of normal, as you would say. So we're going to talk a little bit about the cognitive model of organizational behavior and the role of thinking. And we kind of already did this a little bit, but we're going to go through it a little bit more. So the model highlights how thinking might influence behavior. So if we stay on the example of your perception of your instructor, first you have the situation or the task. So I think the one that relates mostly to what you said was workplace cues. Because with workplace cues, sometimes they're not always spoken. It's not always verbal, right? And so the next step would be thinking. And here's where a lot of things happen. You have assumptions, perceptions, beliefs, biases, cognition, and knowledge. So in this step, here was a situation, workplace, or we'll say classroom cues. Then this is where you guys started forming all kind of whatever it is that you form, assumptions, perceptions, beliefs. And then we're gonna come here. So after you formed whatever it was in your mind that you formed that you're not gonna tell me, how did that affect your behavior?
It didn't basically, once you, okay, like you said, like, just the appearance or whatever, you look like you were put together, and then once you start talking and then give us information about yourself and all that, it basically said, okay, yeah, I was pretty much right about what I said, and then pretty much, okay, like, she doesn't look very hard, look like she's not going to be a hard instructor, would be using. understanding and so forth. So it's like more, I guess, more confident or something like
So,
that.
so that produced for you a confident behavior. You felt confident that you would be able to perform well.
And because some instructors you have, you mean, they may teach and they know their stuff, but you still feel like you're not learning anything or getting anything from like the way they put out the information.
Okay. So what about any other behaviors based on the assumptions and perceptions and beliefs that you developed on the first day of class?
When I first walked in and I saw you, I thought you were going to be strict or strict
Okay.
questions, but then afterwards, seeing you more and talking to you, I see that you want the work done, but you're not as strict as I made up in my mind.
So let's stop right there. Let's go back to the first part. You said that there's situation through the classroom cues. You thought in this column that I would be strict. Now, how did that? Not thinking about what happened later, but initially, how did that affect your behavior? If you think that a person is strict, it might curb your behavior for you to sit up straight in class, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to bring home here is how a situation or something that happens might affect your thinking and how you perceive things, which will in turn affect your behavior. Is that clear to everybody? Did I kind of do that right? Everybody clear? All right. So we talked a little bit in the beginning about the different levels, individual, group, and collective. And so we're going to talk about some of the patterns, thinking patterns that are related to organizational behavior. So within an individual, here's some of the things that go on within ourselves. Assumptions. Everybody knows what assumptions are. Somebody give me an example, a new example about an assumption that they might have made. Doesn't have to be in this class, just in general, in life.
When I first moved down here, I assumed that North Carolina was going to be country and
Okay.
just not New York completely.
So that's
It's
a
not
good
New
example.
York, but
It's a good example. So you assume that this area would be pretty country.
right.
All right. Any other assumptions? That's a good example.
I heard worse things about Fayetteville before we moved out here.
So you had, while she had assumptions about the state, you had assumptions about the actual city.
The actual city, apparently Fayetteville's nickname among the military is Fayetteville.
Okay. So what assumptions did that bring?
Maybe there was more bad parts of the city than good
So you
parts.
assumed that there would be bad, okay? All right.
Considering there's a 9-page blacklist out there for all active duty military, it's not, there's certain areas, like people talk about the Merckson all the time, that's one of the blacklist streets that we cannot stop on. If we get caught stopping or purchasing anything in any of those businesses on that street, we get an Article 15.
Even renting apartments and housing.
Yeah, there's like half the trailer parks in Fayetteville you can't rent out because it's substandard living. I mean, they have, it's like 9 to 10 pages long.
So it sounds like what you're saying is some of your assumptions may have been assisted
Correct.
by somebody else or something else.
Because this is one state we've never lived in,
Okay.
either me or my husband, so this is like a new adventure for us.
All right, so that's a good example too. What about perceptions? Now move down the list, perceptions. We all know what perceptions are, right? How we perceive things. And it doesn't have to necessarily be about the city, or it could be anything in general. Nobody? All right.
It's like a touchy subject if you think about it.
You think, why is it a touchy subject?
Well,
Because
when
all
you bring
perceptions.
up, when you bring up certain biases, people just automatically assume that's
Oh, we're gonna get to biases next.
Oh.
We're gonna get to biases. But perceptions, I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up because all perceptions don't have to be bad,
No.
right? They can be a good, I could have, let's say one of my perceptions was, I came in class on the first day and I saw this big class and I said, wow, this class is gonna be fun because it's large in size, there's a lot of people here. So, perceptions can be good or bad. But I think for whatever reason, a lot of times, people only think about the bad, right? Which brings us to biases. Going back to your point, biases can be a touchy topic because it may, maybe a little sensitive for some people, right?
Sure.
Going back to your example, your assumption might have been based on a bias, maybe that people from the South are different from people from the North, right? While it doesn't really affect me that much, somebody from the South might have found that very sensitive, right? So, and these are, there's all different types of biases, right? They may be based on race or gender. There's certainly a lot of gender biases, right? Between male and female. But these are all based within our individual self. The same thing with expectancies, schemas, framings, and mental models. These are all things that are related to our own individual thinking pattern. So if we go over to between individuals or in a group, we have a different set of thinking patterns. Does anybody know what the expectancy theory talks about or what it means? Hint, hint, it's in your book. Somebody talk to me about expectancy theory. You're on the right track.
And how to use
Is that
those.
prior knowledge or experience?
I'm sorry?
Like a prior knowledge or experience?
Perhaps.
Or like you have certain expectancy with like the reward programs. It's like you.
A little bit.
Yeah, a little. It's like you have, okay, if you meet this quota, it's like, you've got the expectancy that they're going to motivate themselves to achieve the quarterly
Right.
goals in order to obtain that reward.
Exactly. So it's important, you're right, it's important the take home here is to remember that this is something that happens within a group, not so much as within an individual. We have self-fulfilling prophecies, attributions, framing, mental models, which are on both, and sense making. Let's spend a little time talking about sense making. This one's interesting too. Tell me what it sounds like.
Something
Something that makes sense.
Right, trying to make sense of something, right? So that's basically what it is. And again, this is something that happens within a group. So what happens when we go through these different thinking patterns is, obviously, it might change the way we comprehend or understand something, right? When we assume things, a lot of times when we assume things, what happens? We don't just assume it, we then think it's true, right?
Yes.
So if I'm gonna stick with your example, I'm not trying to pick on you, but if we assume that, the state is very country, we're probably just gonna go ahead and believe that's true. Until what happens?
Get proven different.
Right. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, right? You don't always get to that point where you're proven wrong. And as a result, we hold on to these, right? With perceptions, what happens? When we alter our understanding, well, what we notice is what we pay attention to, right? So if we notice that, someone is organized and well put together, what are we going to pay attention to?
Probably how they conduct themselves, because you have certain
Right.
expectation. If they
Right.
put together well, then you expect them to carry themselves.
Exactly. So, if you noticed, before a person even says anything, if you notice a person is well-dressed or whatever, then you're going to pay attention to how they act, how their body language is, how they walk, how they talk, because of what you initially noticed. Make sense? And then we have cognitive biases, which is a form of mental processing that basically kind of simplifies how you handle information. So as a result, what happens is when we form these cognitive biases, it can affect how we make decisions, right? So I don't want to pick on anyone's example anymore, so somebody give me a new example of how a cognitive bias might affect the way you make your decisions.
There's somebody giving off the wrong kind of energy when you walk into a room.
Okay, so you're in a room and somebody gives off wrong kind of energy.
Like,
So obviously, that's going to affect your decision making, right? Because of the negative energy that someone brings into the room, you may decide not to confront them, right? You may decide, if it's someone you don't know, you might decide not to walk up to them and introduce yourself. Or you might decide not to stay in the room, right? You might leave. So that's a good example. And that's a good example of a cognitive bias, right? How you handled your mental process affected how you made your decision. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about groups and how thinking patterns can affect their understanding or how they comprehend things. So if we start with this self-fulfilling prophecy, it says it's expectations about another's behavior that may elicit the expected behavior. Does everybody understand what that means? So if we, let's say if we're in a group, everybody in this room, we're in a group, and we're working towards, we'll say we're working on a group project. If we're working on a group project, we each expect each other to hold our own weight, right? Contribute equally, do their share, et cetera, right? Well, our expectations about everybody else's behavior might elicit the expected behavior, right? Now, of course, we have some instances in groups where that doesn't happen, right? Now, what might happen as a result of that? It might cause us to form what? Other biases and assumptions, right? So it's important to note that. With the expectancy theory, managers affect employee motivation when they influence employee expectations about the ability to accomplish a task and expectations of reward, right? So kind of what we talked about earlier. If, I want to pick on, let's say, if she's a manager here, and she's thinking in terms of the expectancy theory, and she does something to decrease the motivation of her employees, what might happen?
they may quit.
It might quit. What else?
Mutiny?
What'd you say?
Mutiny.
Okay. In the back?
Might not get the work done.
Might not get the work done.
Or you won't get the quality out of it.
Or you might not get good quality, right? All good answers. So the take home here is to note how a manager can affect motivation and what happens as a result of that, right? And as a result, what happens to the expectations of reward? If a manager is not motivating their employees, do you think that they're going to expect a reward if they're already not being motivated?
No.
Right. Attributions. Inputting the likelihood of a cause of another's behavior. How often do we like to put the blame on somebody else?
As often as possible.
As often as possible, right? To get it off of us, right? And so this is obviously something that may happen in a group setting. It will happen in a group setting. I'm pretty sure. We'll see. You guys can tell me after your first group project. Now it goes along with the attribution theory, which basically says that you are explaining someone else's behavior, saying that it is caused by a situation or somebody else. So kind of along the same lines of pushing off that on somebody else, right? Or saying that there's a reason that XYZ happened, as opposed to just saying, I did it, or it was me, right? Mental models, beliefs about how things work, And sense making, process in which organization members interpret the meaning of ambiguity. So when things are a little unclear, a group might work together to try to make sense of it, right? So here are some lessons from organizational sense making. It says, when organizations make sense of a situation, how they perceive the environment defines their opportunities and constraints. So if we have a problem and we're trying to figure it out, and we just say, aha, I get it now. Once we have that light bulb moment, then we can move forward and try to figure out what opportunities and challenges we may have as a result. So if you're working in a group and you have no idea how you're going to put this presentation together, and then once somebody has an idea, once you have that idea of how you're going to do it, then you can move forward and talk about what might be challenges in doing the presentation or opportunities that may come as a result of doing the presentation, right? When organizations make sense of a situation, understanding is retrospective because, as we say, what hindsight is
2020.
right. So it's very easy to look back and say, oh, you know, I should have did this or should have been like this. So this happens, we get that hindsight. We can't get that hindsight until we make sense of the situation, right? And the third one, when organizations make sense of a situation, taking collective action requires sufficient understanding of a situation. Though actionable, understanding may not be completely accurate. So what this means is, again, we can't take any action until we make sense of something. So once we have figured something out and made sense of it, then we can say what our next steps will be and take that collective action. But you can't do that until you have sufficient understanding, right? All right, so, and this is in your book also, there's 5 disciplines of organizational learning. The first one is systems thinking to recognize patterns of connection, striving for individual proficiency and personal mastery, surfacing and challenging mental models, a common identity and shared vision of the future, and team learning that reduces assumptions and creates shared meaning. So basically what this means is these are 5 strong disciplines that within an organization, these 5 things should happen if we're trying to get or move towards success. You need to have things that are challenging for your employees. You obviously have to have a shared vision of what you're doing that's moving forward towards the future. Team learning will obviously reduce assumptions. Why might that be the case? And this is the intent in this class too. I want you all to work together because we all have assumptions, whether we say it or not. But my intent or my hope is that if you all work together in teams, some of those will be reduced. And you may say, you know, I thought that X, Y, Z, but now after working with this group, I now see that it's not that way, right? So organizations do this for the same reason. It's to try to reduce those biases and those assumptions that people have created in their own mind. Communication. Something we can't run from. We see it everywhere. Within communication, there's a sender and a receiver, right? So, sometimes barriers come up within communication. Raise your hand if you've never had a communication challenge. Nobody should raise their hand, right? We've all had issues where we try to communicate with something or somebody and we had a challenge or a barrier, right? So here are 3 reasons why we might have had those barriers. Number 1, the sender, their thinking and behavior. So, I'm gonna use you because you're right here. I'm gonna be the sender, you're the receiver. So, all right, we're gonna role play a little bit. You know the case study is due tomorrow, right? Have you done it yet? You better get to it. All right, so we'll stop right there. So my behavior was very what?
Direct.
Firm.
Firm, what else?
Direct.
Aggressive, direct. So with me being that way, do you think that our receiver here received it?
Yes.
Yes.
Or did she ignore it and say whatever, or
It just depends. I received it, but then I probably could have been like, oh well.
right? You may not have
I ain't
received
gonna
it.
rush to do
Right.
it.
You may not have received it well, right? Which would have caused us to have a breakdown in communication, right?
It's like raising teenagers.
Right. Yeah. Good example. So the next reason might be the receiver's thinking and behavior. So I could say, you know, we have a case study due tomorrow. You know, it's due by X, Y, Z, and you might respond like,
I'll jump right in.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, or I've already done it, or I'm ahead of the game or something.
or if there's a barrier in communication, the receiver might respond like
I didn't know.
in an aggressive way.
So good.
Right? Or abrasive, or, right, exactly, so what? And, right, and if that happens,
Case study.
there's probably gonna be a breakdown, right? If the receiver responds like that, there's gonna be a breakdown somewhere, right? And then the third way that a barrier in communication might happen is from an organizational setting. So in this example, if we think in terms of, what organization setting can I use? Don't want to use a school. Let's say we all work for a hospital, and the hospital is doing layoffs, right? And the way that they send this information is through an email. How do we feel about that?
Why you couldn't tell me personally?
Right,
You don't fire somebody through email. They
right.
don't.
So that might be a communication barrier, right? From an organizational setting. Whereas it may have been more appropriate to have a collective meeting, or at least funnel the information down by department, and your department manager have a meeting with everybody to let them know that way, as opposed to just sending an email, right? So these are not the only three ways, but these are three ways that communication might break down. So with communication, we also have problem solving. And there's two major steps in problem solving. You have problem identification and then problem solution. So under problem identification, there's a few steps. And this is important information, as you may be able to use it within your own groups. So you may want to take notes on this. So under the problem identification, number one, we have to recognize the problem, right? How can we solve anything if we don't know what the problem is? So we gotta recognize the problem. Then, the next step, we have to identify the cause. We have to figure out what's causing the problem. Again, if we figured out what the problem is, we can't just jump to solving it without knowing what the cause is. Or we may just have to go right back to the top when it happens again. The third step is you want to set goals. Once we've identified the problem, we've recognized the cause, next step, we want to set goals as to how we're going to solve it. And then the last step is to generate options. Sure, we can, identify the problem, recognize the cause, set goals, but what if we only figure out one solution? What if that solution doesn't work? So we want to make sure that we have options, right? More than one option. And then, when we get down to the problem solution, once we've figured out what those options are, we then want to assess them. Because what may happen is, let's say we generate 3 options, and after further analysis, we may find out that, you know what, 2 of those options aren't really feasible options or good options. They're not realistic. So we want to assess the options, and then after we do that, we can figure out which option works best. We can choose among those options, and then we'll implement them. And then once we implement them, we're not necessarily done. We have to then evaluate it to see how it works. Because if we had a problem and we solved it, but the problem came back and we didn't evaluate it, then the problem may just continue to keep happening. But if we solve the problem and we evaluate it to see if it works or not, that's going to help us in the event that the problem comes back. Or if the problem doesn't come back, we still want to evaluate it so that we know that we did a good job. All right, so action inquiry to check assumptions. Here are a few steps that we can do to just check ourselves, or maybe you want to check other people. I don't know, that might be a little dangerous. But the first thing we would do is look at our purpose and our intentions. If we have an assumption that, we'll use the city. If we have an assumption that the city is not so good, kind of bad, the first thing we want to do is when we look at how we formed that assumption, what was the purpose? So if we use our example, maybe there was a purpose of them forming those assumptions in your mind. Maybe that purpose was to keep you out of trouble or keep you safe, which would mean that they had what? Good intentions. So sometimes people, when things happen or they form assumptions, the intentions aren't always bad. Maybe they are just good intentions that were not done the right way. So the next thing we would want to do is state our opinion or feeling. So based on that assumption, how might that have made you feel? Maybe it made you feel more paranoid or nervous.
Oh, I'm always paranoid.
Or scared. You know what I mean? So
I have 4 kids, I'm always paranoid. It comes with the job.
So then that probably made it worse.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So the next thing you want to do is state your opinion or your feeling. Then illustrate it. You want to give a supporting example. And inquiring. So you want to ask for the listener's views. So we're going to do some more role playing. I think we have time. I'm going to use the same example. So all right, so we're going to role play.
Okay.
How do you like living here?
It scares me.
It scares you? Why?
Because there's so much crime in this area. I've heard so many horror stories about all these murders and robberies and stuff.
How long have you been here?
Realistically.
Oh, you say a year.
Okay, a year.
So are these things that you know, or have you just assumed these things?
I've been watching the news.
Been watching the news, okay. Do you think that the news makes it that way to run people away?
No, I think it's just designed to make us aware,
Aware and maybe make us safe,
make safer choices.
okay? And how does that make you feel?
It adds to the natural paranoia, but I think I can make better safety judgment calls based on what they're reporting.
Because I remember I saw something on the news about this horrible burglary where someone broke into this 98-year-old lady's house and held her at gunpoint, and I felt really safe after that because I was glad that the news put it out so that I could know to lock my doors. Right?
Right, and you're sitting there thinking, glad it wasn't my house.
Oh, that too. And so after that, the next step would be for her to ask more about my views.
Mhm.
Like, so we went through each step, right?
So like if you were considered like a local, you were born here, raised here, you know, all the
I might have a
sections
totally
of that.
different view
Right, you got a
on
different
what your
viewpoint
assumption
because it's natural for you. It's like, yeah, that may look bad, but you know what, those people have been in their homes for like 40, 50 years,
Right.
everybody knows everybody, so it's just.
Right, so a little bit of it is about sharing,
Sure.
asking for views from the listener to see what their assumption is. It may be something totally different, right? And that, all of this will help you to check your assumptions. All right, we're gonna stop here. We'll continue on Thursday. Does anybody have any questions about what we've done today?